Here is a buyer's guide for buying a Massey 10 or 12 garden tractor. So things to look for are stuff like these hubcaps. If you were to buy these after buying the tractor, minimum a good set is $100 for fronts with rears, or even sometimes fronts if they have no dings or anything. Another thing to look for is right here. So on here you get your normal up to here handle with a button on it, and those buttons are froze sometimes when you buy them, so you gotta look for that. But this is a power lift. This is $500 if you were to go buy it, and they are very rare. Normally they have a little plate that down here that says power lift. That makes it pretty special. That's a pretty high dollar plate to find, because normally like this one I swap this onto here. But another way to tell is you'll see these little hydraulic lines running along here, and this line. These are not here normally. Normally this is all bare. There's nothing here except for, you'll see the bare frame and this arm. If you see this stuff, then you can tell there's a power lift on this. Other way you could tell is on this side. You'll see this pulley here. This is the tensioner for a power lift, and the power lift sits behind the grill in here. So behind the grill is your power lift, and it comes back to here behind this belt, or these pulleys and belts, to a pulley back here. That is all the part of that unit. And then this shield, this is a deluxe muffler shield. This is a rare option that we're only on the 12 garden tractors. 10s did not have this option because it was a later year thing they added. But this guard in good shape with the muffler, it normally has a round muffler that goes all the way like from here to here and exits down here through some holes. You gotta look for if that's blown out on the ends, because they like to hold water. But this shield with a good muffler on it is a minimum $100. And then another thing to look for is I have 2 sets of these on this, but these are Massey original split wheel weights. You'll find these a lot on like the John Deere narrow front conversions because they look like the cast hubs. You'll also find these for cheap on random garden tractors because they don't know what they have. But these are Massey, only Massey had this style split weight. And there's casting numbers on these somewhere on here. I think they're on the inside, or these are Massey wheel weights, and they are $300 to $500 depending on where you are and what people are asking. But minimum, I bought both of these for $300 a piece. Not like this part and this part plus the other 2 on the other side is what they call a set. A set is $300 to $500. Another thing to look for is on the dash, you'll have possibly a factory cigarette lighter like this, or you'll have a light switch for on the front of the tractor. Right here are little pop outs, so if your tractor doesn't have it, you can punch these out and put headlights in. But headlights are a relatively cheap option to find. Most of these 10s or 12s you'll find that have them, but the only catch is when you go to put headlights in, they had a little bracket that came off the back here, right here, that held the headlights against it with rubber grommets. You have to have that to hold these on. And then here's a better look at that power lift down there. It sits under the air cleaner. Another thing to look for is before you pop the hood on your tractor, watch that this rod is in good shape. As you can see, mine's pretty worn right here and getting pretty thin. But if that's not on there, if you look and see, it'll come down and crack your front plastic nose piece. And this is another thing to look for. this plastic nose piece and plastic dash are very hard to find, and normally you have to pay a lot of money for a good original one, or you have to pay, I think a repop 3D printed one is going for, the nose piece is like $150. So that's another thing to look for. If you're buying a Massey 10, the early 10s had, the first year, 1966 Massey 10s had an aluminum nose piece and an aluminum dash. That is a very rare option, where the nose piece will get you $300 and the dash normally goes for $100 to $300 depending where you are, because everybody wants the nose pieces because everybody's breaks on the plastic ones, but the dash is lesser wanted because that isn't broken very often. And to pull the dash off, you have to take this plate off and take the steering out, and to get the steering wheels off is nearly impossible. And then another thing is the steering caps. They make repops. The man named David Brown, really good guy, he makes repop center caps for like 15-20 bucks. But this is an aftermarket one for like a bigger tractor, but that's a pretty rare option to find that's still in good shape on them. Normally they're all yellowed and don't look anything like what they should, but that's some options to look for. Another common option you'll find is on the back here. This is my custom 3-point, but you'll get something called a sleeve hitch. This is not an option. You'd think back in the day they'd have 3 points, but they made up something a little simpler. That was a 1-pin operation to make it quick and easy to swap stuff, and it's called a sleeve hitch. I'll go inside and show you on my other tractors what the sleeve hitches look like, the aluminum dash looks like, and then some other things to look for, like this power lift. Where this power lift is, they also had something called an electric lift. So what that does, it's a little piece that goes up here and it's electric over hydraulic. So it had a little system right here that looked like a starter almost, that would spin a pump or something to make the hydraulic ram here move up and down, to move your lift up and down and your mower deck lift. But that's something else to look for. That's a little harder, I've found, to find than the power lift system, because I think they scrapped that idea after figuring out it wasn't very useful or ordered very much or whatever. But that's a $500 option to find, and it's very hard to find, but that's something to look for when you're buying one of these. And the other thing is, check your wheel slop when you get them. These hubs are notorious in there to wear out around that axle and can eat your axle. This one ate the axle before, so I had to get it repaired. That was like $100. But to check these, you just take the wheel and shake it back and forth, and you'll see if the wheel will go like this. If it goes like that, your hub is worn out. And then they also like to leak from there. When I first got this tractor, a lot of people would see in my videos that this right hub would always have a red rag tapped around the axle tube, or tied around the axle tube. That was because it leaked forever, and that was a easy way for me to kind of keep that leak down. But there's some options for you to look for, and I'll go in there and show you some other things to look for when buying one. Sorry, it's kind of tucked away in here, but this is my 1966 Massey Ferguson 10. That is the first year for these. And the other thing to look for is, here's the rear tail light that they're supposed to have when you get the headlight system. That is the rear tail light. It's the same as some trailer lights, so that's where I got mine. And then the front headlights are 4411. They are sealed beam bulbs. So I'll do a little pan up to the front to show you what that looks like. But here's the sleeve hitch I talked about. This is the single pin system that you slide over. It has like a C channel that goes over here, and then a pin slides in, and then these are to go against the plate where the C channel is to keep it from flexing side to side and doing all that. But to tell if you have a 1966 or something early, normally the old rims down here are painted red in the center. And then also the brackets on the front where the mower deck is, like this one's are pink, those are red. So that's something to look for if you have an early one. This is the center cap I talked about. That's a repop. That's what they're supposed to look like. And then here's what the light switch kind of looks like when you get it. And then when you're buying these tractors, they had 2 different or 3 or 4 different type of engines in them. A lot of them, this one's aftermarket, but the early ones had this on it. They had a starter generator that spun this pulley to start it. And they have Tecumseh engines. That if you find them with a Kohler or a Tecumseh with an overhead valve, then you don't have the factory engine. This is what an overhead valve looks like. These are 14 or 16 horse engines, and a lot of people swap these in, but these are not factory. They do look the part, but if you pop the hood and see that, it is not original. And then this piece right here, it goes with your deluxe muffler that I showed you earlier. This is an extension for your oil fill, so you can fill your oil, because that shield goes right here and then tapers, and you gotta go all the way down to down here to fill it up. And without this, it makes it really difficult to do. But that's something to look for when you're buying one. I'll show you those headlights real quick. I'll jump over. But they're in there. They look like that. But this is an aluminum nose piece. If you peck on it, it's pretty hefty, and you can feel it's really strong. And normally it's cold because of if you're outside. Normally this feels cold. The plastics do not do that. And then here's what an aluminum dash looks like. You can tell because these edges are a lot smoother and thicker than like the plastics, like this one. Look how thin this one is. There's my fingernail for example. Look how thick this one is. Fingernail for example. It is about a 1/16 of an inch thicker, and you can physically feel the difference and see how these curves are and everything. But that's something to look for when buying one. Also, these fenders like to wear out and crack, like this one back here. So that's something to look for too. How much it wiggles is a pretty good indication of how well they are. Also, figure out if this is stuck. This is a lockout for your first gear on the gear drives. Make sure this isn't stuck, because I've had that many times. And then on the fender pans, watch if this is all rusted out, and this underside, make sure it's not all rusted out like this. This is in good shape. Normally these are all rusted and worn out. That's a pretty good sign of how your age or how well they were kept. But that's a little bit of a look for these. Also, they had different style seats. This is the low rise, as you can see. It just has this little backing. And then over here, I have a rised seat. So they'll have this little gap. And then this is adjustable to move up or down. This is homemade, so this is not what it looks like. It normally is just a solid cushion. that's rectangular, and then they'll have like this design on it. This one's pretty worn out, but that's something to look for. Here's this from the back. And then on the hydros, that some of them had this under the tank. If this is set over, then this is because of this system. This is a hydro specific pan, and they moved this over and then had this down here. This is your hydraulic fill, and it's an extra tank for a little more fluid. It's a little easier to check this way, but not most hydros do not have that, of these Massey 12s. To tell if you have a hydro or not from the picture without having to ask, this guard here, the hydro specific, and then on this side, this knob sticking up above the hood is hydro specific. And then normally they have a sticker on here that says hydro speed or something like that, and goes on the side. And then these gear drives are supposed to have variable speed. To tell if you have a gear drive is pretty easy. This plate that I told you about on the hydro isn't there, and you see the little wiggle stick. There's a good way to tell if you have a gear drive. If it's from unclear and it's from this side, this right here, variable speed only. So this little shifter here is for gear drives only. And then here's a good way to tell from if it's an early year, this will also be red. Some people, I will say, go and repaint those red because they think it looks a lot better. But normally, if it's faded old paint, you can tell if it's a gear drive or not, or early year. That's what I meant to say. But yeah, that's just some things to look for. And then back to these nose pieces. These are warped normally and have cracks. Like this one's cracked and then it's warped. You can see it has that bow up. That's pretty typical to these, and it's very hard to find these in good shape. Most that you find are cracked or broke or have been repaired or are bowing. It's pretty hard to find these in good shape. So if you find them, pick them up. People will buy them. But there's just some quick things to look for when you get 10 or 12. Then the only thing I can think of then is on the early year tractors, the steering arm, like on this one. This one is a later year, not first year tractor. They had these steering arms. These are this is cast. Some of them are plastic or a cheaper made arm. This is the one that you want to go look for, because these crack a lot. You find these broke all the time. An earlier one, or some of them had these cast. This is one that you want to look for. But there's just a little video of things to look for. Here's the other seat that I was telling you about. It looks like the high-rise back, but it doesn't have the adjustment like the other. And then I'll show you, here's like what you can look for under the pan for some rust. These edges are normally pretty worn, and then this center, as you can see down there, has some rust that rusted through right through here. So just some stuff to look for. Also some cracking here and stuff. But if you're buying one of these and it has paint like this, it's normally $500 to buy if it doesn't have any special options. And mower decks and stuff like that, mower decks don't really add value unless you yourself are going to use it. I will tell you that, like over here, I'll do a little walk around of all the attachments and how much they go for. Here's a blade. Here's what it looks like. This blade, normally about $100, $200. Normally $100, but if you don't find them in your area, normally it's like $200. Then up here, snow blower. There's multiple types of snow blowers and how they mount, but snow blowers normally 100 to 300 depending on how useful you'd find it. Now mind you, these attachments are solely for your purpose of use. If you want to use it on your tractor, it's whatever you want to pay for it, basically. Not a lot of people look for the attachments for the collector part of it. They normally don't want to mess with it because they're big and bulky. Here's what the mower decks look like. Those, $100, all you're gonna get. Unless somebody rebuilds one or you buy a rebuilt one. A rebuilt one normally is like $200, but normally people don't pay that. So $100 is about all you're gonna get out of those. These also had tillers. The tiller had 2 different styles. One of them was a small one, and it was only like 32 inches wide, and that is about 100 to 300. That's a more sought after attachment just because people use it for their gardens and they work real well. Another thing is they had the extended version, which is, it looks exactly like the little one, except for it had a 1 foot extension off the right side, and it goes a little past your right wheel, so you get a further strip of till without having to worry about running over it again with your other tire. That's about a 48-52 inch area of tillage behind it, but that is about 200 to 500 depending on what shape it's in. But that's a pretty sought after attachment. So there's some things to look for. And then they had sickle mowers. That's hard to find. Those are typically $500. They were made by Hay Band. They are pretty hard to find. So those are $500. And then they had a bunch of other attachments, but as you go into the rarity, typically any other attachment for these that I haven't mentioned is $500 minimum. So if you're looking for attachments that are rare, then be ready to shell out some money. Normally you gotta pay more for the attachment than you did the tractor. The tractors, normally they go for $500, but if they're in rougher shape, they go for like $300. And then if they have really rough paint and they are worn out and everything and missing parts, $100. Like if they're in this shape, this is a Massey 14, but if you're missing parts or they're taken off and they look real faded and are really rusty and stuff, $100. Don't pay more than $100 for them. But that's just some stuff to look for when you're buying a Massey 10 or 12 garden tractor. One last thing to mention before you click off of this: if you are buying a 10 or 12 that is not running with these Tecumseh's engines, do not pay a whole lot of money for it. Like $300 is most I'd pay for one not running, because these engines can burn you pretty bad. Meaning, this right here has not your typical Kohler style points ignition. This has what's called a solid state ignition, meaning they had a little module that as this flywheel came around, there was a magnetic pickup and it would fire off that. When they run amazing. I've had no issues with it, except for if that module goes bad that is behind this shield, that this engine will not run and you cannot find a replacement for them. Only person that I found has a replacement for these is called Overnight Solutions, and he sells a little custom board and pickup that picks up the same way and bolts in and everything. The only problem is he's offering it for $500. So if you want to make your original engine run, it is $500 if that module is bad. That module is normally in good shape, but if you don't have it running and it's not getting spark when you go and turn it over, then that's probably why. And then these shut off from sending a ground or in grounding out your ignition. So look for that as well when you're going and troubleshooting it. But on the early style engines, like I said, they had multiple styles. This one has a points ignition. It is very weird that they changed from the points ignition in the early one to the solid state. I've had no issues with either or running. They run both about the same. The only thing to look for is if you have a solid or a points ignition, it'll have a coil on it, and it runs to the power wire, runs to the back side of this on this back corner, and they had at the very bottom they had the points. So that's something to look for. Some of these early ones had points ignition, and then you can swap that for an easily for a Kohler points setup and everything. It's pretty straightforward. It's not that big a deal. And then your charging wires just come from behind here. There's a little charging system behind the flywheel. Pretty typical stuff on these garden tractors, but the only ones I found of these Tecumsehs with points ignition have the starter generator. So if you're looking for an easier one to put together, look for an early Massey 10. Those had some of them had the points ignition. So there's just a little quick addition to the video just to help make sure you don't get burned on one of these things. Because only other thing I found, because these engines right here, both of these run, but if they don't run, typically if I'm going to spend $500 on it just to make it run, I'd like it to be brand new. So that's why I went with this. This is a Predator 459cc. It's a little more horsepower than what was in these, and this will bolt directly in. The only things you have to do is get a different pulley for this side. You have to get 2 pulleys on it if you want to have an accessory too, but you have to get a different pulley for that. And then you also have to, when this bolts in, this is not modified anything on the factory tractor. The only thing I did was on the right 2 bolts will go into the factory bolt holes, and then you have to get rid of your air cleaner system right up there behind the grill, because otherwise it'll touch. All I did was I made a little flange that this bolted to, and then ran a little pipe that went forward to have the air cleaner bolt to or clamp to. So there's just a little addition to that. Just if your engine doesn't run in the Massey 10 or 12, normally try and get it for like $300 unless it has some of the rare options I mentioned. But if it's running, you shouldn't have an issue. But if it's not running, then definitely watch for if that will create spark or not, because that will definitely burn you. But I'll leave it there. I thank you for clicking on the video, and hope you enjoyed this little buyer's guide, and take some notes of if before you go and buy one of these Massey garden tractors. But they're definitely a good one to buy. They're pretty reliable. I've done all sorts of stuff with them. Anything from pulling double their weight to pulling a 8-foot disc like in this background. And they're pretty tough tractors. I've had nothing but good experience with them. I might be a little biased, but honestly, they've been pretty good for me. So hopefully this is helpful for you, and good luck buying.